There you go. Works. All right. All yours, Martin.
I'll just bring it up. Okay.
Everything's being recorded.
Talk among yourselves.
You got it?
Oh, it's still opening up. Trouble with all this added AI stuff, which intrudes into everything, and it just takes longer and longer, and then you've got to turn all these things off. Come on.
Something come up?
Okay. I think I've turned off, here we go. I think I've turned off my Zoom connection.
Can you
hear me?
You can still see you.
Still see me? Okay.
Then hear you. So you want me to share it?
I just I don't have the screen where I can see everyone. Hang on, here we go. Here we go. All right.
There you go.
Right.
That's it.
That took a while. That's why I think we've got bandwidth or memory problems with some of these Zoom things. I'll click on OK on there. Okay. Right. Well, as the thing is titled, a new look at early Australian machine cancels. For many years, I've actually been salting away collections of slogan cancels as they've come onto the market. Well, most of them from the locals here. So I've got I've got Lance Holden's entire collection, Arnold Keller's collection, Andy Jansen's collection have all been accumulated here. When Robin Ockleshaw's collection came up for sale, I got the post World War II half, but somebody outbid me on the pre-World War II half, so I'm still picking up bits of that. I've got a little bit of Barbara Barcher's collection, but most of her collection has ended up with the PS of SA Library via Tony Presgrave, who's been trying to get it into some sort of an order. So I have got thousands of slogan postmarks here. And of course, preceding the slogan postmarks, of course, are the machine cancels with no slogan at all. And of course, the machine cancels, of course, produce the slogan postmarks as well. And it occurred to me that really nobody's had a good go at trying to sort these things out for Australia. And when I retired, I decided to adopt that as my retirement project because I thought it would be pretty cheap, with a retirement income a lot less than what I'm getting when I was working. And B, I thought I had a good head start with all the slogan postmark collections I'd bought, and I just pull out the machine stuff from those. And to a large degree, that's been the case. I've probably got about 2,000 covers put aside for these things so far. And I try to pick up new things either in original or picture form as I see them being offered. The pictures that you'll see tonight are just being plundered from everywhere. eBay, Del Camp, auction houses, some websites, and I'll come to those in a moment. So I thought, well, we'll have a look at what's been done before. And for New South Wales, and on the Phyllis website, you'll find that they've actually put digitised versions of a lot of their collections now. So you'll find a digitised version of the Dr. Bruce collection of New South Wales postmarks. You'll find a file on the S. McNeill collection of postmark proofs. Now, we think that McNeill was a dice thinker and he actually made postmarks for the New South Wales Post Office. And there's numerous pages of sample strikes of these postmarks, mainly around the 1910 period, 1910 to 1915 period. Tony Orchard's and Tobin's Ride Out to Toshiba, part of their series on the postal history of Sydney. And in my mind, that is probably a terrific piece of research, probably undervalued at the moment. And they've certainly had access to things which I just cannot find in archives. So whether they were among those files that got destroyed by National Archives in Canberra or they're just held by Phyllis somewhere, I just don't know. But they certainly describe things that I just cannot ascertain. And of course, Colin Salt in the sort of the noughties began compiling details on the machine date cases of all the states that didn't already have a substantial reference work. And he's done one for the New South Wales country and suburban post offices. For Victoria, Colin's done one for the machine date cases of the country and suburban offices of that state. The other work that's a work in progress, Brian Fuller, who's a member of the Royal Vic, I was rather hoping he'd be here tonight. He's done a draft work on continuous and trip cancellations of Melbourne, which also includes a chapter on continuous roller cancellations of Victorian. I bought a draft copy of Brian's book shortly after I retired, and I went through it, and it's really, really hard going. It's a terrific piece of research. Scientific collection of data must have been one of Brian's fortes, I expect, in his past life. So there's lots of information in it, but some of the references and some of his conclusions are a bit confused. And of course, a lot of chapters just leave more questions than they do give answers. So there's something that, I'd encourage him to keep working on it. But it's a difficult reference work to use unless you incorporate it with other things. For Queensland, we've got Colin Salt's book again on the country and suburban offices, and Salt and John Booker's book on Just Brisbane. And Jeremy Hode's, this is an online handbook of Queensland date stamps and instructional markings, has a piece on machine cancels, which is largely Hugh Campbell's and Marius Wittenberg's works just summarised. So there's nothing new in that particular section of that online book. For South Australia, have Colin Salt again. Some people may remember John Edwards, who was a good member of the Adelaide Stamp Clubs. He wrote a series of articles in the old Australian Post Horn on machine cancels for South Australia. And at present, Tony Presgrave's working on machine postmarks of the Adelaide GPO and Mail Exchange, largely based on Barbara Barcher's collection. Tony did go to Melbourne a couple of years ago and looked at some National Archive files which he hoped would include some details on South Australia. And he actually paid to get them digitised, so they're now on the National Archives website. Prior to the South Australian records from National Archives being transferred to Canberra, I went through all the machine postmark files here and the slogan postmark files, and I paid for them to be digitised, and they're also now on the website for the National Archives, so you're free to have a look at those. Tasmania, Colin Salt's book for Tasmania again, and the only other work really is the Postal History and Postal Markings Volumes 1 and 2. But of course, for the period that covers, we're only talking Hobart and Launceston, with much of the work done by the late Bill Purvis. Western Australia was tackled this series of 3 monographs done by the WA Study Group. So Brian Whitaker did one on slogan postmarks, and Arnold Creaser did ones on the machine date cases. One part is Perth and the other part is the rest of WA. With the Commonwealth, we have Robin Ockleshaw's slogan cancellations in 2 volumes. We have a series of books by Ken Sparks on postal mechanism, nearly every one of which will have a chapter on machine cancellations, and Dennis Wallen's book on postmarks and slogans. What I'm adding to all of those previous researchers' works is really going through the newspaper trove to see how the introduction of mechanisation into Australian post offices was reported at the time by the newspapers. That generally starts in 1901 and works its way through in some detail up to about 1910, 11, and then it tends to fall away. And then you'll also, surprisingly, now that Trove is including more and more country newspapers, finding a little bit of details from a country newspaper about when a machine was added to the local post office to improve the conditions or improve the productivity of that post office. So it's hit and miss. Not every place had a country newspaper, and but I have been surprised at some of the things I found. National Archives, of course, is getting more and more files digitised and put onto their website. Now, I've looked at South Australia. There's probably 50 files in Melbourne, which I think Brian Fuller has looked at, but none have been digitised apart from the 3 or 4 that Tony Presgrave got done. So that's going to require some time, either visiting Melbourne or spending a lot of money to pay them to digitise the files. And that's presently about $35 per file, and there's 50 of them. So do the sums. There's also more files listed in their index in Canberra and also in Hobart. So those are 3 places where some time or money needs to be spent to add to this story and add to the understanding. The mechanisation of postmarking, of course, comes from largely America. And there's a Machine Cancellation Society in the United States, and I've reproduced quite a few things from a document they produced to go with a society display at the New York exhibition in 2016, which was basically just a page on each sort of manufacturer of machine cancels. In the United States, they came to their fore in the 1890s and 1910s, and it's still being developed today, and it's probably the first place that most people would look at for details on machine cancellation developments. The British Postmark Society has a very good website, and at the moment they cover Hay Dolphin machine cancels and universal machine cancels in some good detail, but the other types are yet to be done. Postage Stamps of New Zealand, Volume 3, has a good chapter. Well, it probably has about 3 chapters on machine cancels, because they also have extra ones for TPOs and for slogans. New Zealand development of machine cancellations is extremely important to what happened in Australia, because so many Australian machines actually came from New Zealand, which is one of the surprises I found when I looked into this. And of course, Whitney's Collect British Postmarks gives some summary details on the early machine cancels that were introduced in Great Britain. Like the machines that have been used in Australia or trialled in Australia. So we have The first ones were from the Bar Fike Company, which were in St. Louis in Kansas. They were probably the dominant supplier of machine cancels in the United States from the mid 1890s to mid 1900, the first decade. Then they sort of were overtaken by new companies, significantly the Columbia Postal Supply Company. And those two companies provided the first machines to come to Australia, to Melbourne and to Sydney. We then have the machine cancels from New Zealand coming in, firstly from a gentleman called Robertson, who was actually an employee of the New Zealand Post Office, who looked at what they had imported from America and thought, I could do that much cheaper than what they'd done. And so he did. He developed a few machines for the New Zealand Post Office, but then he got tapped on the shoulder and said, you've probably got a little bit of a conflict of interest here. So he sold the rights to a postmarker machine syndicate, which later became John Burns and Sons. So when I refer to New Zealand postmarking machines, it's one of those three, depending on the period of time. The Cummins Time Marking Machine Company, they actually developed a postmarker with an inbuilt clock, which used to set the time on the postmarker to the nearest minute. So remarkable bit of mechanism, but I suppose also in danger of breaking quickly and easily. And Australia got two of those for Sydney and Melbourne, accompanying what they called a pickup table, which is an early name for a face-up table where people would sit down and turn all the envelopes as they came from the mailboxes, turn them all around so that the stamp was in the top right corner, and then they could feed them through the machines. The Imperial Postmarking Machine Company was a competitor to Burns and Sons. They did a trial in New Zealand in 1919. They did a trial in Melbourne, but I don't believe any live mail was produced for that trial. So it was only internal stuff, and nothing appears to have survived from that trial. We then have the International Postal Supply Company. They made the Hay Dolphin range of machines, and most significantly the Hay Dolphin Flyer. And in fact, even back in the 1890s, they were probably the serious competitor to Bar Fike as early as that. And they went right through to the 1920s and 30s, and Queensland and West Australia bought Hay Dolphin machines in the 1920s. And then finally, we have Universal Stamping Machine Company, which was an American company. And the PMG department, as it sort of got grips with being a national department rather than a Victorian department, introduced this as the machine that was going to be used everywhere. And from 1927, that was the machine of choice and the machine they ordered. But interestingly, in a sort of still with a buy British policy, the machines they bought were the American machines, but manufactured in the UK. It's quite surprising with the buy British policies of the time, that so many machines were actually sourced from overseas companies. The one I've left out there is the Krag machines from Norway. They had a very proactive agent in Australia, and they made great inroads into several of the states, and then were being made locally under license, so they would pay a royalty to Krag but make them here. Right, first up, Bar Fike. This is from that United States Machine Cancel Society's display. So it shows you the type of machine or type of postmark that was produced by a Bar Fike cancel, quite distinctive with all those vertical lines. Bar Fike bought the patents of two other companies. So in the end, they actually offered three different types of machine cancels, which are here. So we have the Chicago one with the lines, and that was the one that was offered to the New Zealand. Well, it's the one that the New Zealand Post Office adopted and purchased as their first trial and use of a machine cancellation. When New Zealand brought that in 1899, they got inquiries from numerous other postal administrations, all of the states of Australia, contacted the New Zealand Post Office for their opinion on the machine. The Italians did, and the British did as well. So it was a much watched trial there. Barfike had a couple of flag cancels. The one they actually sent to New Zealand as a sample was the one of that second Chicago one there, which is actually described in the book as a flag cancel with 13 stars with a large P. And when I went hunting through eBay lots during the last week or so, I was fortunate enough to find precisely a cancel of that description. So that's reproduced there. And the other one is what they called a tasseled flag design. And here we have an example that they've provided to Mexico. So there's a lot of Mexican post offices have Barfike cancels. And you'll see the similarities between the flag portion of that with the Melbourne one to the right of it. That one was the second type of canceller in Melbourne. The first type is above it, which just has the wavy lines in it. And I have seen that for some other American offices, but I couldn't find a clear one to illustrate in this particular presentation to go with the Melbourne one. A point on nomenclature. These cancellations are usually divided into two parts: the data, being the circular bit there with the place name and the date and time of posting, and the canceller, the piece that cancelled the actual stamps. So here we have the first Victorian type. It arrived in April, the machine arrived in April 1901. It was actually trialled, I think, on dummy mail. After that trial, it was actually reported in the papers as being used for backstamping. A lot of these machines were actually used as backstamps, and some of them almost solely for backstamping mail. And whether that was because the cancelling operators didn't trust the machines, or whether it was because it was useful to backstamp mail because these trip machines had counters on them, so they could put all them through the machine and then get a count of how many letters had arrived from a foreign or another suburban office, etc. On live mail, the earliest known date's 26th of June 1901, which is actually one of the Rundle first day covers of that 1901 series of Victorian stamps, which replaced those inscribed stamp duty. So that's the earliest on cover, probably per favour. And then in normal mail, we start to see them around August 1901, like the example I'm showing there. They also had a postage paid version of that. So they had a datus with a 1 or a dot. And they had datus with paid Melbourne in it. And on the stamp cancelling side, the wavy lines and two types of the tasselled flag, distinguishable by the distance between the flagpole and the flag on the two types. And they were in use in Melbourne until 1906. The Columbia machines were the other major manufacturer in the United States. It's interesting that when the New Zealand had got their first machine, they actually sent off for further details on the Hay Dolphin machines and the Columbia machines. And when I get to the New Zealand part, it's interesting to make comparisons with what they were looking at and what they produced. So here's a typical Columbia machine with a data and a parallel lines canceller, which we'll see here in this trial, which went to Sydney. This cover is an illustration from a Rod Perry catalogue from the late 1990s. I have no idea where the cover is now. Maybe somebody watching might have it. And we can certainly see the similarities between that and the Columbian machine from America. Interestingly, this one's got you can just make it out, it's got a number 15 at the base of the data. And interestingly, that number 15 appears on other Columbia machines in other places around the world. Whether this was a pattern number that they sent to postal administrations to pick a design or what, I don't know. But it's unusual that you should see number 15 as being the number, and I've seen this on American cancels, British cancels, and New South Wales cancels. The other distinctive things with the Columbian machines is, in addition to the straight parallel lines, we get that sort of mock flag type cancel with the three portions. That's found here in London. It was also used in New South Wales and Victoria and the United States. I've seen it for. And also where they've interrupted the parallel lines with some further details on the location of the office. So for the London example there with the EC, and of course with the New South Wales in the Sydney example. So this was a trial early 1902. Then after the trial, they actually ordered their own machine, and this is distinctive because it does not have the 15 at the base of the data. And these were only used for about 3 months in 1902. Orchard and Robin thought this may have been a bar fight machine, but I'm more convinced it's a Columbia machine. Then we get the Columbia machines with the number 15 at the base. And Sydney had 2 different machines, and they're usually distinguished by the month date that's in the data. One machine had 2 character months and the other machine had 3 character months. Usually used as a backstamp, as shown here, and sometimes used without the cancelling part and only showing the date stamp as a backstamp. And those covers are actually difficult to find. And I don't know whether it's because, it is quite likely because people, when they offer covers on eBay, they rarely illustrate the backs of covers, so you really don't know what's on them unless you ask, and then you just make a nuisance of yourself. So I usually don't worry unless I can see both sides of a cover. The Columbian machines were actually offered to all states to purchase them, but only 4 of them did. Interestingly, South Australia, and this is common to other places as well, still did not have electricity into their general post office in the early 1900s. So it was pointless getting machine cancels because they had no power to run them. Same case was in Hobart, and I think the same case was in Brisbane, but they actually took steps to get theirs in a bit earlier. So here's one that Perth bought. This cancellation is actually one of 3 examples I've known with a March 21 date, earliest known date, and probably also the first date of use of the machine cancel in Perth. And newspaper report from that same date, reporting of its introduction. Brisbane was a little bit unusual. Brisbane had the authority to buy this machine, but it was unclear in the correspondence that they received from Melbourne that they had the money to spend to buy the machine, and they did not order it until the following financial year, when it was pointed out to them, hey, you didn't spend the money that we allocated for your postmarking machine, go ahead and order it. So they did. So they were a year later than the others and got theirs in 1906. This particular example here, June the 11th, is the earliest I've seen. And it seems, for some strange reason, not to have been used greatly at the time. Whether they had mechanical problems with it, whether the postmarkers just resisted using it, I do not know, but I've seen both of those reasons given for usage of these machines in other cities. Point with the Columbian machine is that it could be a trip machine, which means it gives you one impression, or it could be a continuous machine, which gives you an impression all the way across the cover. And it seems that one side of the Columbian machine given to Brisbane had these wavy lines, indicative of the Columbian type machines, on one half of the dial, and on the other half it had these straight lines with a great screw hole, and you can see the screw head in the middle of it. And occasionally, when the switch, which made it only a trip machine, has given way, you get impressions of both sides of the canceller. So those are opposite sides of the same machine. Melbourne, of course, they ordered two machines, and they were in use for a good 5 years. And they also had paid versions as well for the dating cancels, and several different variants of the Victoria cancellers. A continuous Columbia machine was trialled in Melbourne, This was actually identified, and Brian Fuller's quoted the National Archives file on this, which says it was actually installed on the 4th of January 1909, and by the end of January they were seeking reports on whether it was successful or not. So here's an example I found for 25th of January 1909 with a reasonably clear strike at the cancellation. Very simplistic. So place, time, date, and that's about it. There was also a paid version of this, so the paid slugs were used in place of the time slugs. And according to Brian Fuller, that's actually a very rare use of this particular machine, the paid slugs. Then we come to the New Zealand machines. These are all from volume 3 of Stamps of New Zealand. These are all machines where we have the trip machines, so where the canceller part is different to the data part. So we have the Wellington machine there, which you can see is a dead pinch from the Colombian machine. The Christchurch machine there from 1904 is a dead pinch from the Hay Dolphin machines. Hay Dolphin machines are very distinctive because they have the year engraved in the data. And it was a feature of their supply that they would actually supply free of charge a new data to users of their machines each year. There was a trial of, I think, a New Zealand produced machine emulating the Hay Dolphin in Sydney. Only went for about a week in January 1904. There's a copy illustrated in the Phyllis collection that they're holding. There's this drawing here, which is from Orchard and Tobin's book, which is a different date to the used copy that I've seen. But beyond those two, they're the only pictures I've seen of that particular postmark. Then we have the continuous machines where the data is still separate from the cancelling lines. And we have those with a circular data, and then with just text as the data, and then with the things which is really just emulates the crag machines, what they call the bridge types. So New Zealand's looking at what was coming in on their mail from overseas, particularly Columbia and Hay Dolphin machines, were pretty quick to copy other people and then pass on those ideas to people that they were selling their machines to. The machines which had a separate canceller and date lines were introduced into Adelaide and Sydney and Melbourne. Here's the one introduced to Adelaide in April 1907, along with a newspaper report describing its introduction and use. And this particular example is used on the first day of use of that canceller, which I think was quite a nice thing to find. It's actually one of 2 copies I've seen from the first day. Then, to be different, Melbourne also got a machine in March 1907, a month before the Adelaide one, and they had the circular data rather than the text datas. And they must have given these machines a really good hammering, because this thing only lasted 3 months, so March to May 1907, and it was probably worn out or had dies replaced in it with something new. Then we have the machines which emulated the crag machines. They were extensively used in Sydney. So the Sydney people really liked the New Zealand machines and did not like the crag machines. The Melbourne people really liked the crag machines and did not like the New Zealand machines. So probably nothing new in that interstate rivalry. But it went on for many years, really right through to 1927, when the universal machines started to replace them all. So quite clearly there we have the Sydney one emulating the Wellington machine. When the Sydney ones were retired, they tended to go to suburban and country post offices. So we see them there. They then, like the one here from Burwood, would have been one of the Sydney machines as it got retired. And I've also picked these machines being used in Bundaberg here, Maryborough in Queensland, and Kalgoorlie in West Australia. We've also had these machines, which seems an odd mix, but that's what the evidence shows us so far. The next real development is being described as a postmarker, a bit like a bobbin from a sewing machine. And this is a picture from the New Zealand book. So if you imagine something like a stack of discs or a stack of coins, and around the rim of each disc, we have a different part of the postmark design. So instead of having that separate data and separate canceller, we now sort of turn it from a vertical aspect to a horizontal aspect. And we can see here then that there's no need to have those distinct separations. So if we look at there on the top one there for the New Zealand TPO, if you can imagine that was 3 discs, the bottom disc would have the date details. The middle disc would have the post office details, and the top disc would just have some straight lines, obliterating lines. Now, remembering, of course, that when these machines are built, the letters are actually fed into them upside down, and that's why you always get the same distance between the top of the cover and the top of the postmark. And so if we have a look at the picture, the main trunk bit would be the lines would be the bottom bit, the main trunk bit would be the next bit, and then the south bit would be the bit where you can see the slots there, which would be the spaces for the date. And if you think about that, then if an operator's got to change anything, he's only got to pull out the top disk, change the date, and all the others can stay in the machine. So it's quite innovative and probably quite clever. So the New Zealanders developed that further. So then we have a type where the details are in between the lines. Then they managed to add slogans on above the existing machines. And then we have a distinctive type where the details are all only on the bottom line of the postmarker, or i.e. on the top disk in the postmarking machine. And then we start to have some Australian examples of these machines. Why Charters Towers got one of these machines in 1908 is a mystery to me, but they did. And this is the type where the details and the lines are together. Furthermore, places that sort of got these: Express Railway TPO in South Australia, the Port Pirie, Adelaide, Launceston, Brisbane, among many places who got this particular type of machine. And I've also, as part of my exercises, I've been also looking at sort of where machines are taken out of commission and then repurposed for other places. And in this particular case, I believe that the Port Pirie machine is actually the Express Railway machine with a new centre piece being engraved. The distances between the lines on either side of Port Pirie are the same distance as the lines on either side of the words Express Railway, and all the other dimensions on those two machines are the same. There's other places where this is apparent as well. The situation here where we have the details in between the lines, most prevalently used in Sydney in 1909 to 1912, and then we see the machine reappear in 1924. I don't quite understand why, except that nearly every example I've seen it on is a back stamp on an airmail cover from the Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney airmail service. Some of the other early places that had this type was Haymarket and Port Adelaide. The Moonta Railway TPO had this as well, and I believe that the Moonta Railway thing then became the Port Adelaide postmarker, because one finishes as this one starts. And then we have the example with all the text on the bottom line only. So the English Mail TPO, and for some reason, a lot of TPOs got machine cancels. But here we have it all on the bottom line. And this is actually from a coronation flight postcard arriving in Australia. And nearly, I won't say all examples of this English Mail TPO appears on the back coronation postcards. And then later repurposed at Geelong, which is quite a rare postmark, I believe. I think that's one of 2 copies that I've seen in reality or as a picture. And then lastly, the New Zealanders managed to put a slogan on top of these bobbin type postmarks. They started in 1912 advertising the Auckland exhibition for 1913. And I've managed to find this example for Sydney for the Finish the Jobs by Peace Bonds slogan. And it is the only example of a slogan affixed to that type of postmarker I've seen, and that's the only example of it I've seen. So I would think that's probably a very rare piece, but really to know that requires more people to keep looking. Then we move on to the Krag machines. So the Krag machines were developed in Norway by Gustav Hansen, but his financial backer was Niels Krag, hence that's the machine name. Usually quite distinctive by this, what they call a bridge type design, where the place name curls across the top over sort of a bridge. These were quite extensively used through Australia. They all seem to appear in late 1908. And from what I can see, they all seem to result from machines being loaned to mail exchanges in the Christmas rush of 1908. And I found for 3 states at least, early 1909 newspaper reports on the Christmas business of the post office, where they described the machines in use and the numbers of letters that pass through the mails and everything else like that. And I think this is a very, very clever piece of marketing by the Krag agents in Australia. Loan these machines, the machines proved their worth, and they all got bought. So successful were they, then they were actually then extended to other post offices around the country. So here we have a couple for Queensland, for Warwick and Cairns, and the Gazette notice authorising their purchase for those 2 places, and also for Ipswich. The Krag machines also came with paid versions, and the paid versions are often confused by the Robertson machines or the New Zealand machines. But when you look at the British postmarks, these things are very evident in the British postmark types of Krag machines that were supplied to them. So we have the normal postmarker being the circular data, the paid postmarkers being the lines of text. Now, quite a few offices did not bother with the paid penny bit and just left that blank, and then just used them as normal postmarkers, as per this Ballarat one. I've also seen that done for Melbourne. I've also seen it done for Brisbane. So I think it was, I don't know whether it was an emergency or laziness, or it was a definite intent that they would leave out the paid details and just leave it for a postmarker. Then, of course, the Krag machines were in 3 parts. So they had a central part which had the data on either end of it, and then on the sides of that there was 2 where they could put in a semicircular slugs for initially for lines, and then lines and place names, and then ultimately for slogans, as is demonstrated here. And those 3 parts were then all clamped together into a form of a spindle, which then fitted in the machine to give them the details. One of the more fascinating ones to me is the time marking machines that I mentioned. 2 of these were ordered in 1911, one for Sydney and one for Melbourne. They were based on studies of the Chicago Post Office, which was one of the first post offices which was multi-story with mail exchange as a mail exchange, and they could use lifts to shift mail up and down and be processed in different stories. Certainly the model for the Melbourne Mail Exchange, which was built in 1917, and I think Sydney already did operate over several stories of its building there. They marketed what they called a pickup table, which was used for people to quickly sort letters to have the stamps in the top right corners. They would go on a conveyor belt, and then the idea was that they would then be automatically postmarked by one of these machines attached to the end of that table. And if not, then they were just picked up and carried to a normal machine. So, and as I said, it had the capabilities of adjusting itself to every minute of the day. But in Sydney and Melbourne, they tended to go to quarter-hour implements. Here's an example from April 1912. This is, prior to this, the earliest known dates recorded were December 1912. So I think this is part of a trial. And I've seen 3 examples from April, all of them are on foreign mail. And foreign mail is probably a different part of the mail exchange in Sydney, and so it only appears on that, and probably only as a trial. The machine had a fixed date of 1912 on it, so when 1913 came around, they had to get new dies made for the data. And in the McNeill book of proofs, I was surprised to find the 2 Sydney marks for 1913 engraved in there. And of course, the 1913 Cummins machine is most, I won't say most frequently seen because it's a damn rare cover on first day covers of the Pennyroos. So not only is it a first day cover of the Pennyroos, it's also a first day cover of the hand stamp with a 1913 date. The machines also had a space, and you can see the letter C there on the top example. Usually that space is blank, but it was designed to have one of 4 letters. And in America, the C was for a collection, so that was all the mail collected from mailboxes. D was for a drop, so that was all the mail that was dropped into the Sydney Post Office. T was for transit, and so that was mail passing through the Sydney Post Office. And R was for received. I've never seen a D or an R on these Sydney marks, and I'm showing there the C, and the middle one shows the T mark for a transit cover. As was mentioned, these machines were sold with a pickup table. The pickup tables were installed in both Sydney and Melbourne because the newspaper reports tell us that, and here's a very coarse photograph of the Melbourne pickup table, which shows the gentlemen on either side, and of course they would be turning all the letters around so that the stamps are in the top right corner. They would then drop them into a conveyor belt, which would then come out at the end of the table, and you can see the postmarking machine there in the foreground. Now in Melbourne, and probably in Sydney as well, they just picked them up from the end of the table and hand-fed them through the postmarker. I have seen similar pictures to this from additional pickup tables that were put into the Melbourne Mail Exchange at a later date, where the postmarking machine is actually attached to the end of the table. So ultimately, they did get used for what they were done, for what they were designed for. Now, despite the orders for Melbourne, and the Melbourne example of that Cummins mark is yet to be found and just has not been seen. And then surprisingly, there are a few examples of this mark from Prahran, all in 1915. So for about a 3-month period in 1915, we see this mark. Quite a rare thing. I've only seen pictures of it, not seen a real example of it to date. Then we have a bit of a jump now to the 1920s, where, as I said, the more federalised Postmaster General's Department were looking to standardise things across the country and take away the autonomy of the single state administrations to order things. So they first trialled with the Hay Dolphin machine. They actually, the person who went to the UPU conference in 1920 was tasked with the idea of collecting details on machine cancellations, and he came back and was told that the best ones were the Hay Dolphin machines and the Universal machines. So they ordered a Hay Dolphin machine for Brisbane. That was in 1923. Came into use, I've seen 1924. It was late 1923 it was installed. I've yet to see a 1923 example, but I've certainly seen them coming in from 1924. Very distinctive because, once again, they have the year engraved at the base of the data, and that got changed every year with a new data. The other place they trialled one was in Perth, and they brought that machine in 1926. So here's an example from 1926. And that was in general use in Perth to about 1935, and then suddenly you have a huge gap, and then we find examples in the 1950s. And the reason for that is that these older machines were often used as sort of cannibalised for spare parts, or were often used, kept in reserve, so when things like Christmas time came around and there was a lot of mail to process, these were used as supplementary machines to the universal machines, which were then in common use. And so you'll find limited use of these machines, and they generally relate to peak posting periods. Then the universal machines, they were from 1927, they came into play, and that became the only machine they then ordered from 1927. It came in two sizes, a double G machine for the big offices, the GPOs, ordered double G machines, and that's a picture of one there and the types of postmarks they produced. And then for smaller post offices, they ordered the double D machines, so a smaller, lighter capacity machine. And that then became the norm right through until the Pitney Bowes machines replaced them in the 1960s. I'll leave the presentation with this mark from Ashfield. I have no idea what type of machine produced this. It's very distinctive, and I have not seen it on any other style of postmark for Australia or New Zealand or America or Britain or anywhere. So whether this was a locally made trial, I don't know. Whether it was an emergency die made to replace a broken one, I don't know. Just very, very unusual. And that's probably the point where the early machines sort of end and the universals come in. So the appropriate point to end this particular presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think that's fantastic. I didn't know there were so many machines. Various machines. When I look at some of those postmarks in collections that I've seen, they all look the same to me. Now, until you pointed out the differences, I can see the differences. Any questions from Martin, from any people out there? None.
I just ask one question. The purchase for these, was it coordinated centrally, say, from Melbourne, or did each state do their own little thing up to, say, 1930?
I would say until the 1920s, each state did their own thing. There were some attempts and offers from the administration when it was in Melbourne to make the same types of machines available across Australia as per those early Columbia machine offers that were made to all states, but not all states took them up. But I think really until they started the Hay Dolphin trials in the early 1920s, every state did its own thing.
Thanks, Martin.
Any more questions?
I've just got a comment that whenever I've seen any of these marks, they're nothing like as good as the examples you've shown, Martin. I suspect you've extracted from thousands to get those very, very clear marks.
I've looked at a lot of covers on eBay in the last 4 years. Yes. I mean, most of the things I've shown I don't actually own. They're just pictures I've found on eBay or Delcamp and used the picture. In fact, if you're keen on some of them you can still buy on Delcamp right now or eBay. You can buy them right now. So, whether this will equate into a significant collection or exhibit is yet to be seen. But I'm just finding it so complex at the moment to sort all this out. It's proven to be far more difficult than I first anticipated, and I don't think we'll get closer when I get a chance to see the maybe 75 odd files in Melbourne, Canberra, and Hobart. But even then, I don't think we'll have the true answer. And the only way you'll get a true answer is to basically find the operator's logbook for every machine.
Yeah, I'll back Martin up on that one. The whole field is still a very large unknown, and both Martin and I are still searching, guessing, looking at things, looking at mail. I still have a habit of turning postcards over in particular to see more what's on the back than the front. And it's still very much an untapped field, and there's a huge amount of work still needs to be done.
You would have thought that since it was in use for such a long period of time, that there would have been some work done in the early years.
The Bruce collection was done in the 1930s. That's about the earliest I've seen. Interestingly, in the philatelic press, the purchase of the Cummins machines made it into the philatelic press, but virtually nothing else did.
Jeez. Any more questions or comments?
Well, Martin touched on the early machines. I can assure you, the bigger tin of worms is in the later machines, getting up into the Toshibas and so on, because you just cannot find anything. Australia Post didn't release, or didn't. I've never found anything really on any of those, and there's still a lot of guessing going on there. But certainly the early ones are the more fascinating field as far as I'm concerned.
All right. Any other questions?
Martin, is it possible that the fact there aren't such good strikes surviving is that earlier collectors tore the stamps off the envelopes, and they generally tore off in preference the ones with slogan cancelled, and kept the ones on covers with nice strikes or oval cancels?
I think the removal of stamps from covers was endemic for the early collectors. Most things that survive nowadays did not survive because the collector saved it in 1905. It survived because it was in a business or family correspondence archive, which later came onto the market when these things were starting to be appreciated.
Thanks, man.
All right. If there's no more further questions, Martin, thank you very much. I think we've all learnt a lot. I know I have learnt a lot, because I assumed a lot of those cancels were the same machine. Didn't know there was all those various different machines. The thing that really struck me is that the US machines, like you said, there was no, since we were British, there was no British machine. Did the British do any make any machines?
Not really. They tended to, if they did make machines, they were generally under license from an American
so
company who invented it, and that was largely because so that the Americans could sell machines to British Empire countries who had a buy British policy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. I know that Bill's going to send you a medal in the mail and a certificate in the mail. On behalf of the Royal, I thank you for doing the presentation. I just feel embarrassed that we only had eight people present. I think the work that you put in.
We got 10.
10. Oh, 10. Oh, well, that's right. We had two extras. That's right. I forgot about the two extras that come later. Anyway, on behalf of the Royal, thank you very much, Martin, and I'd just like everyone to just thank show the gratitude in the way, just give a little clap on the screen, or put a little clap hand if you want. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Most welcome.
I will end the recording here, and then I'll do some more other general stuff.